And one of the things that I see that is the biggest challenge for people in listening to their inner voice is the amount of shoulds that they've taken on from their families, from society, from past experiences, even of maybe trauma or, where they had a really bad experience taking a risk. So I think that listening to our inner voice, it can be complicated.
Hey there, and welcome to the Career Flipper podcast. I'm Jenny Dempsey, your host and fellow career flipper. This whole thing started because after getting laid off and questioning everything about my own career, I got really curious. How do people actually do this? How do they make these big career changes? And more importantly, how do they keep going when it gets messy and confusing and you have $0 in your bank account? That curiosity led me here, to having real, honest conversations with people from all kinds of industries and backgrounds about how they navigated major career changes on their own path. So if someone shared this episode with you, I gotta say, that's amazing, because it means they really care about you and your success on your career path. So grab your earbuds, get comfy, and let's dive into some career flipping inspiration. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. There are new episodes every single Thursday, and I don't want you to miss any. Today's episode, though, is a little different. We're not sitting down with a career flipper, but instead talking to someone else who sits down with career flippers to help them navigate the changes. Meet Katie Asmus, a licensed professional counselor and founder of the Somatic Nature Therapy Institute in Boulder, Colorado. Changing careers isn't just about switching jobs. It's often this huge, emotional, life-shifting experience. At least it was for me, and it still continues to be. Maybe more of an existential crisis. I don't know yet. But anyways, if you've ever felt like that, trust me, you're not alone. We're really diving into the messy, the magical, and the downright confusing world of career transitions. So Katie and I are chatting about what she calls the rites of passage that come with career shifts, the importance of listening to your inner voice, and why change can feel so overwhelming, yet so rewarding. And we also talk about the grief that can come with making a big change and how your body reacts to that change. And honestly, this conversation hit home for me. I found myself leaning into what Katie was saying, especially, I'm in the middle still of my own career flip, and things are a little more clear now, but I'm still so confused, and every day is something new, and I can get really stuck in my own head. So I am always trying to figure out what is going on in my brain. And getting the chance to pick Katie's brain during this conversation was such a game changer for me. I realized I'm not just flipping my career. You're not just flipping your career. This is a whole process, a rite of passage of personal transformation. So if you're also, like me, feeling lost, stuck, or honestly just unsure of what's next, just keep taking those steps and listen to this episode. It is packed with actionable, real advice, not super woo-woo. It's real, data-backed advice that is going to help you navigate your own career transition with clarity, a little more confidence, and maybe even a little smile on your face. So let's get to the episode now. Katie Asmus, thank you so much for being here with me today. Tell everybody about you.
Thank you so much. So fun to be here. So my name's Katie Asmus, and I live currently in Boulder, Colorado for the last 27 years. And I am a psychotherapist, a life coach, a rites of passage guide, and I do a lot of training of therapists and healers in different nature-based modalities, somatic, so body-mind connection experiences, and ceremony and ritual. And one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about here is with life change, the words that really rise up for me is rites of passage. And how do we look at roadmaps to really support us in those unknown times?
Ooh, yeah. I just got chills just thinking about that. I think that it resonates so much because while we can talk about, the job, the actual tangible job changes that we're doing. Oh, we're moving from this role to this role, or we're starting this business and we're filing taxes this way. All of the things that are important. There's so much of the internal work. And as you mentioned, rites of passage. And I know for myself, I might define that a little differently, whether that is what, might be showing up for me on my path, but also what I'm giving myself permission to do. So I
Yeah.
think talking with you today about that, it's just interesting. So how often do you work with people who flip their careers? Is that a common thing that shows up with your clients?
Oh my goodness. Yes. And I think especially now in the world where there's so much more freedom, that people are more thinking about entrepreneurship. And it's not like, 50 years ago or 30 years ago when our parents committed to a job and literally never left the job for the rest of their lives with moves, et cetera. So it's a pretty common topic, really. I think relationship, work, those are two of the big topics that people come in with.
Yeah, totally. And that's very reassuring to know that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
A lot of us are navigating this. And so if you're okay with it, Katie, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and then kind of things that I've learned along the way with talking to career flippers around the world and just things that might come up, because there are certain things that even I am like selfish. I'm like, ooh, I got to ask Katie about this.
Yes,
Because,
please.
oh my gosh. So I guess like in a nutshell, my career started and when I was in college, and I went into customer service, customer experience, and I didn't really question it. And I think that I didn't question this corporate world working in, the 9 to 5, simply because that's what I saw my family do. That's what I was told to do. You go to college, you get a job, you work that job, you stay in that job. You don't really need to like it. You just got to do it. And so
Yeah.
kind of going from that trajectory, I didn't question it until I got laid off and couldn't find a job, and realizing how much of my identity was tied up in work, and
Yeah.
just really realizing how much I was pushing down a lot of these creative sides of myself. And I'm curious to hear, when someone kind of goes through this transition who didn't expect it, like I didn't ever question it. And I know there are people that I've talked to who they feel these things are like nudges, or they're like, oh, I just feel like I need to change. Like I don't know, at least I don't remember feeling any of those things. Do you have any thoughts around how do some people feel these things and some don't? But then when something happens, you hit this like rock bottom place that suddenly you're like, oh, now I need to think differently because what was working isn't working anymore. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, again, I so think in the model of rite of passage, which is really about change and acknowledging that when there's a big change in our life, sometimes that's choiceful, sometimes that's not choiceful. It's like we can't go back, right? When we become aware of something or something changes, we can't go back. And our whole being is sort of oriented toward familiarity. So there's often a panic. And then what that does is it causes us to listen in a different way, begin to listen internally, or also maybe search and see what are other people doing here. And it literally changes our identity. So as you're talking about that, right, some people are maybe feeling the call already or feeling unsatisfied. And I think so much of how we relate to change, and especially in this arena, does relate to our families, the beliefs that we grew up in, the ethic, the work ethic, whatever the different ways we relate to life and to change, and then to work as part of that. So I think some people already have more maybe internal permission to make change when there's an impulse or a call, whereas other people are going to wait longer, or it's going to take a crisis, or in quotes, or something that we didn't choose to actually really call us to listen more deeply inward.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about this work identity and how we get so entangled with it being who we are, and why does that happen? Like, I get, because it is so hard to untangle, and it's just a process that I feel like is ongoing. Even when we do start our own things and do things that really light us up, somehow it still kind of becomes entangled in who we are. And like, is that okay? Like, what does that look like as far as like a rite of passage when we're kind of moving forward through life, but this identity is kind of tied to, you know, elements of a job or the job itself?
Yeah. Oh, I feel like it's such a big question because there's so many different nuances, right? And many different nuances that this could touch on. So, one is I'm just thinking about maybe even if somebody doesn't love their job, but their self-esteem might be mixed up with how am I performing, and how am I doing in compared to other people? So that could get touched on. And then if we love our job, there's also our soul is mixed up in how we are interacting with it. And again, what is coming from it. And then there's the happiness factor, which, and I think now in the world too, there is, I would say, an unreasonable expectation on happiness, right? But it's also a motivation that we're often striving for and looking at, can my job or can my career be a part of that? So I think, as some people have more of a stance of I'm going to work to live and I'm just going to show up every day and get the thing done so that I can go and live my life in other arenas. And then other people live to work, which I think, again, it could be achievement, it could be self-esteem, or it could be creativity and soul expression. So I think there's such a diverse range of the different ways that our egos and our souls really get connected in with our work and our satisfaction in that area.
It's interesting to hear it kind of like the two types of people, because I know that I've had those people in my life, people who just work to live and people who live to work. And I feel like I was always the work to live because that's just what I knew, but I always needed to make an impact for whatever reason. Like I was just helping customers with their, computer related stuff. And somehow I needed to turn it into something to make an impact. And even to this day, like anything that I do that I start on the side or whatever, there's just little part of me that's always like, I can't just work to work. And I've tried that. I've tried to just work for the paycheck and it just didn't work for me. And so I'm like, why is that? Why do we somehow need to, is that tied to these old belief systems of work being ingrained to like achieve, like you mentioned, achievement, or I don't know, I was a former people pleaser, semi-retired, I should say, people pleaser. Is there something there that still needs a little bit of work, or is it okay to want to work in a job and make an impact, even if it's not a huge one? But I guess I'm just kind of curious, how do you know sometimes when it's like, ooh, I need to work on this versus, oh, that's actually totally okay and healthy?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great question. I think that, right, everyone is so different. And for some people, I think it can really be okay to just go to work, do the thing, and they can be satisfied with it, right? And other people are like, no, I need to have meaning. And that's part of the drive and the motivation. And I think in general, we are meaning making people. And there's something super important that you're pointing to here, partially, which is we need to have a motivation. If anything in our life is going to be sustainable, we need enough of a motivation. And so that motivation can be either one, it can be, okay, I'm making enough money to live the lifestyle that I want to live, or it could be, I am doing the work that lights up my soul. And I think with anything, being a psychotherapist, I think is it impacting your basic mood and quality of life, right? So there are a lot of things we do that might not be like the most enlightened we could live, but it's not impacting our life in a huge way. So I think it's for each individual person to really search their own heart and soul and say, this is good. Like, this is working for me to not love my work because I have all this other, aspects of my life that light me up, But if that is impacting our mood, our relationships, our ability to get out of bed, then it is definitely a problem or an issue.
Right, right. That's a good way to look at it. Like the other things outside of yourself, how is that impacting that? And I think that that can be a great indicator sometimes when we don't really know if it is good or bad. Like, how is that working for the rest of our life?
Yeah.
And I think something else pops in my mind, Katie, is just like this call to do something, whether it's different than what we did before or different on societal standards or whatever that looks like, leaving a stable job. And I say stable in air quotes, but a stable job and starting our own business, or, instead of working for a company, starting our own, going back to this, like this feeling, this call. Cause I know a lot of folks come on the Career Flipper podcast and they talk about, I just felt like I needed a change. I just felt like it wasn't scary. I knew the cost of staying was more than going and doing something so brave and bold and scary and not having as much money. And I'm curious if you could talk about that, like moment when people are trying to make that decision. Like, how does someone trust that settling maybe not is not the right choice right now? Or how do they know when it is the right time to go and kind of trust that inner wisdom? How do we trust that? Because sometimes like it gets so clouded. You see you laugh, yeah, like clouded with like, society saying, well, you got to have money to live, or you got to pay your bills, you got to do this and that. But it's like, but I want to do this. How do we know that our inner wisdom is leading us in the right direction?
Oh my goodness, so complex. Well, one, I want to say, as you describe that process of, the wanting something more, that is the process of growth and evolution, like literal evolution, that call to something more throughout our entire lives. And again, I think, there are so many different things that influence that, our values and also our capacity to listen to our inner voice. And so there's such a key piece here about values and motivation, right? Because for some people, the value of stability is so much greater than the value of passion, or something else. We could say a lot, do that with a lot of different values. And one of the things that I see that is the biggest challenge for people in listening to their inner voice is the amount of shoulds that they've taken on from their families, from society, from past experiences, even of maybe trauma, or, where they had a really bad experience taking a risk. So I think that listening to our inner voice, it can be complicated, right? I do parts work. So there's different parts work models in the world. IFS is a well-known one, but listening to like the inner child or the inner wise self or the inner critic. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, especially if we're not used to really sort of pausing and understanding the complexity, the inner critic voice could get mixed up with, our inner wise self, or et cetera, because there's often a lot of inner conflict happening within any decision. So how do we listen? I mean, I think practicing, and I think there's so many ways to practice listening. It could be through journaling, through art making, through meditating, and really listening over time. What is consistent? What keeps bubbling to the top? What are the consistent desires or longings that keep coming through? I think doing something like taking time out of life to kind of change up the environment, even if it's camping, or maybe going on a trip, something to sort of get quiet, listen inward, without all of the noise that is our world at this point, and to really, again, see, who am I when I'm really just with me? What are the voices that keep coming through? So those are a few different ways. Also, having people who know us well and love us give us reflection and say, you've been saying that to me for 5 years. It can be helpful to go, oh, I have. You really haven't been happy at that job for 3 years. Maybe, yeah, I think that is true. That is consistent. And really getting that feedback.
Love that. I love that. Getting the feedback from those that matter and that you trust, and giving
Yes.
yourself the permission to be quiet with yourself. I think that's also huge. And maybe if there's anyone else listening who's also either semi-retired or full-on people pleasers, like that can be challenging. It can feel wrong, even though it's not. Like there's like what is it, intrusive thoughts that come in, like, if you're starting to think about taking care of yourself, suddenly it's like, no, 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 you need to be doing this, this, and this to make sure that so-and-so or work or whatever it is taken care of. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes it can get a little, well, I know for myself in the past, it would get a little cloudy where I was like, oh, I want to do this to take care of myself, but it felt so wrong, even though it actually wasn't. And once I did give myself that permission to just like listen and be okay with like things not necessarily being okay, it kind of just unlocked a lot for me.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like the pace of our world today and all of the technology and different communications is making it even harder, because I think for most people, at least that I know, that in order to listen, really, we need more than 1 hour. We need more than an hour, one here or there. We do sometimes, and this is part of Rite of Passage, it's like we need to remove ourselves from the day to day, and go, okay, how do I feel now when I'm not responding to all of the emails, when I'm not responding to all of the needs of my children or family or loved ones, et cetera, because it's so, when that's how we're orienting and with such a fast pace, there isn't the space to really listen deeply inward often.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. It's kind of like, when some employers will give you like, a week of PTO and suddenly that's supposed to be everything for the year and you're supposed to be able to reach
Yes.
like, no, like, I think that's just such a good point of like the expectations from the outside and what we actually need for ourselves, and being okay that sometimes it does take a little bit longer. Cause I think that that's also, I don't know, important. It doesn't happen overnight. And if it does for someone, that's amazing. But like, I don't know. I feel like for me, it was just like this ongoing thing. Even years before I got laid off, I was starting to just, I don't know, think about the people pleasing aspect of myself and how that showed up for me, and like working through that a bit. But it's been years and it's still something that is a ongoing progress, not perfection type of thing. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's just, I think it's important for people who are thinking about making a change and being able to know like, oh, is it the right time to leave? Should I leave this job? Should I stay? Like, and just kind of getting into that quiet space on a regular basis and giving yourself kind of this permission to really think about what you actually might want and align it with your values. And that's a
Yeah.
big deal, because those are kind of like, they help anchor you into what actually matters.
Yes. Yes. And as you're sharing this, one of the things I'm thinking about is obviously everyone's in a different experience or different level of, is what I'm doing working for me? Is it toxic? Is it just not satisfying? And I think sometimes, again, with change, if we are not listening and something really isn't working, something will happen, like with our health, or where it's almost like, okay, now you don't have a choice. It's really, the stress is being internalized. And so sometimes can be the catalyst for a big change for people.
Yes, that's so true. Tuning into that and just like acknowledging that this is happening. And if you're not going to do something about it, then it's going to do something about it for you. I think
Yeah.
that's important for sure.
Yeah.
And the part is so hard too, because it's easy enough to go to the doctor, say you have, something going on, and get something for it and kind of just go on your merry way and not pay attention to it. So how do you kind of like factor that in, Katie, to like, if someone's navigating a career change, things are going to be stressful, whether even if it's a good change, how do you
Yes.
kind of tune into what your body might be saying, and kind of just acknowledge it in a way that also keeps up with, so much else going on? Does that kind of make sense? Like, how do you do it all?
That's a great question. So listen, you were asking about listening to your body within the
Yeah.
context of the change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think really when you are making a change, suddenly your body and your particular voice is the navigation, because when you step out, you're stepping out of the known into the unknown, which is why it's so terrifying. And in the rite of passage model, so the first step is letting go. The second step is the liminal, or the no name, or the messy middle that goes on way longer than we ever want it to. And then is the incorporation, bringing the new change into the body. And so when we go into the unknown, and that could be going into the unknown of what am I going to do next? It could be I made a choice to make a shift, but what is it? Or I made a choice and I know what it is, but I have no idea how to do this because I've never done it before, really. And in that liminal state, it is really about continuing to listen inward. And personally, I mean, I think everyone's different, but I am a somatic therapist. And when people are trying to make decisions, I will say, well, let's see what happens in your body when you think of these different things. When you think about maybe staying at your job, what happens in your body? When you think about leaving, and obviously that even in of itself can be complex because there might be different experiences. But we always say the body doesn't lie. There are debate teams. Our mind can debate any angle of any choice at any moment, but our bodies know. And so if we can get skilled at really noticing our sensations, kind of getting quiet, taking some breaths and asking our bodies, there's a lot of information that we can get in here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And I think some people I know I've chatted with, they're like, well, I'm not into that woo woo stuff. I'm like, this isn't even woo woo. Like, this is just like,
Science.
yeah, exactly.
It's science.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And it can show up in such weird ways where we might have just been living with something a certain way for a very long time. And then it's like, oh, wait, actually, maybe that's not like the right or the healthiest thing for me, or maybe it's trying to tell me something. And it's a good reminder for all of us that as we are navigating a change, I kind of picture it like, I heard someone say this recently and it just hooked with me. It's like when technology upgrades, like when your phone is upgrading to a new version or whatever, things get a little wonky. Some things don't work right. They don't work as you remember them. Buttons might show up weird or colors might look weird, but it's like, once it's done, it's like this updated version and it's just, okay, like things are going to work different, but they're even better. And I feel like kind of when we're going through change, and I'm sure you could speak to this so much more than I can, but we go through this kind of our own upgrade process and things aren't going to work as we know them. And things are going to be a little wonky and weird. And we're not going to maybe have answers to things right away, or we'll feel certain ways about things that we didn't really realize, or maybe values do shift, or maybe, whatever it is. And so, just kind of going through all of that upgrade.
Yes. Well, as you describe that, I think about one of the metaphors for the liminal, the middle, kind of the messy middle of change, is a wandering in the desert. So we're sort of wandering out there, like, where are we? Who am I? What's next? And if you think about before a big change, we've been living our life with very particular expectations, internalized expectations, ways of doing things, values, and we're not questioning them that much. We're more in functioning mode. And so when there's a big change, it suddenly shines the spotlight on all of those things, on what we value, how we're doing things. It gives us the space to question all of those things that in some ways we just usually don't have time for. And again, the ante is upped because if we're in the unknown, there's often fear that arises. Am I going to be okay? Who am I? What am I going to do? In this case, how am I going to make money and support myself? Am I going to need to compromise myself? Is it possible to do something I love, etc.? So all of those different pieces are really coming up in that place as we are in the middle, right? And one of the things is when we go through a rite of passage, what happens is we are shown or we find capacities in ourselves that we never would have found without the challenge. So we find, we start to access qualities, capacities, because of that challenge, to meet the challenge. And so often, especially if we're doing this consciously, with enough support, which could look a lot of different ways. If we're doing this consciously, typically we come out on the other side more intentional, more aligned with who we are.
Yes, that right there makes so much sense. These things that we didn't even know that we had in us. And once we're faced with this challenge, they just kind of show up like they've been there this whole time. And
Yes.
It's amazing to me how that happens. It's also just like, I feel like through that process and I'm still going through it. So I'll just say that, but like through that, I have learned that I can trust myself a lot more. I can trust that inner voice. I can, push away the one inner voice that's just like, this actually doesn't fit into my life anymore because I trust more.
Yeah.
I've seen what I can do when I am in this rock bottom place. And really just, lean into that. And can you talk a little bit more about the rite of passage for a career flipper specifically? Like, what are some things that, if you were working with a client who is going through a career flip, what kind of things would show up in a rite of passage for them? What does that mean for a career flipper?
Yes. Well, again, I would say the really looking at what are you letting go of? What are you ready to let go of? What are you letting go of that you might not be ready to let go of to actually take this step? And then when you're in the middle, really looking at how am I going to get the information that I need? And typically it really is a combination of listening inward, listening to, what lights you up? Where are you drawn? Where's your curiosity going versus what's repelling you? And maybe like you're doing here, talking to other people who've gone through this, and hearing their stories and seeing what resonates with you, whether that's the process they went through or how did they know, or, maybe if there is something you're leaning toward stepping into, going to talk to somebody who's working in that industry or arena about what are the challenges, what are the things that light them up. And then running that through your own filtration system, how does that land for me? So I think there really is this giving yourself permission and space to not know immediately, because it's a big decision to change your whole life and a lot's at stake, or it can feel like a lot's at stake. And so really taking that space. And I think, for some people, maybe depending on their capacity and their resources, there is okay, I'm going to take time off. I'm going to take time off, listen inward, do a little, looking, searching what's out there. And for other people, that's just not possible financially. So then it's, how do I do this process while I'm still working this job? Or how do I make an income to support me while I do this process? So I think in that way, it's really different for everyone how that looks, but I think it really is learning to, find that balance of listening inward and like looking for what else is out there that we might not even know exists.
Yeah, that really resonates so much because it is such an up and down process. And it's very much about, well, what do we actually need in our lives? Some people can take that time, some people can't. And that doesn't mean it's not available to them. It is. It's just a different toolkit that you have to kind of tap into, it sounds like.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it makes it very real how you just described it, because change is a natural, normal process that will show up whether we want it
Yeah.
to, whether we choose it, or whether it's chosen
Yeah.
for us. And so having this kind of in the back of our minds of like, well, if we choose to change our career, cool. If something else comes in our path, we also have the ability to navigate that as well. And
Yes.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So true. So true. Life is change. Life is change.
Yeah. And there's a grieving process with every change, even good
Yes.
change. And I think even with like losing a job and changing a job, even if it's a job that we love, changing to something else that fits better into our life, like the grieving process and giving ourselves, going back to
Yes.
permission to grieve that. I think that's complicated because not a lot of people talk about that grieving process with
Yes.
changing a career. Is there anything that you can share, any bits of wisdom around how do you navigate that?
Yes. So, and by the way, there's a really great book that I think your listeners would love if they want to read a book, which is called Transitions by William Bridges. And he is a psychologist and looked at all processes of change through the rite of passage model. And this is one of the things he talks about, which really struck me when I read it, a long time ago, and has stayed with me, that exactly what you said with any change, whether it is positive or challenging, absolutely, we are letting go of something. And he talks about the real importance of making space to acknowledge and honor what that is, because it might be, oh, I loved my coworkers. I didn't like my job, but now I'm solo and I really miss that interaction, etc. Or financially, or whatever it was, or I was confident in this and now I don't really know what I'm doing. So in order to keep moving forward, it can be so helpful to acknowledge the losses, acknowledge what's ending, and also celebrate, maybe, because in all changes there's usually things that we are maybe happy or excited about or relieved about, things that we're sad about, maybe even things that we're angry about or resentful for. And so when people go through changes, whether that's career or relationship or other, that's often I'll help them create ceremony around just putting to words, acknowledging, sometimes burying something or burning things, that is all really acknowledging the multiplicity of the different feelings that we have around the change. And essentially that is grief. Grief is all the things, right? Grief is the denial, the bargaining, the sadness, the anger, the acceptance. And so to make space for all of that, because I think often there's so many feelings present at once that we just don't know what to do with it. Or, people say, aren't you happy you are finished with that? Or are you, and it's so much more than that. And so if we can really give ourselves the acknowledgement and honor and time and space, it can open up ourselves and open up space for really to be more present, to hold the questions about what is next or how do I want to engage going forward.
Right, right. It all goes back to that listening to yourself, getting quiet, listening to yourself, and
Yes.
tuning back in, tuning that radio station back to you for a little bit. And yeah.
Yes.
And Katie, kind of on the lines of all of this that we've talked about today, because there's been so many things, and I feel like each different kind of topic that we chat about, I'm like, this could be a separate episode. But I'm
Yeah.
have kind of any final pieces of advice for someone who might be listening right now, who might be sitting at their desk and feeling just burnt out, wants to make a change, but isn't sure what to do, or someone who's in the middle of it and trying to make that change and keep going? Do you have any advice that could help them on their path?
Yeah, I think kind of where we started, which is maybe to commit to some sort of practice or experience that really allows them to start to make the space in their lives to listen. So whether that is a journaling practice every day, an art practice, maybe a walking, just going on a walk every day, holding questions so that, it's not something that's necessarily going to come quickly, but it's important to really make the space, take the space to value ourselves enough, again, to step out of the day-to-day, the shoulds, the answering the emails. And even if it takes a year, we're going to be in a way different place in a year than we were. So I would say, listen, really listen to that longing and see what can I give myself to really honor the question so that I can hold it even more consciously.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. And even I just feel like I could do that more as well, and just really give myself that permission to listen more. Because even when you do make the changes, and you just sometimes it gets so loud with how many things are going on, and really making it a regular rhythm in life, whether it's a short walk or a yoga class, or I don't know, just sitting and staring at a blank wall for 5 minutes, like whatever that could look like, or whatever anyone can fit in. I think that's a really important reminder. And you made it very accessible to everyone. We could all do it in our own ways and really kind of like customize it to fit into where we're at in our lives. And Katie,
Yes.
yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the other thing I was going to say is this podcast is an incredible resource for people. The other thing that I would say is find people you admire, or that are doing the things you're considering doing or have made a change, and talk to them about the process, because people have gone before us, even if we're going to do it in our own way. So that balance of really taking time to listen inward and to go out and actually do the work to see what is possible.
Yes, so true. So true. Don't be afraid to ask the questions and get curious. That is really the only reason this podcast came to be. Like, I was just like, I need to create a community, and I don't see it out there. And I want to feel validated that I'm not doing something totally wacky. And just talking to people really became such a source of comfort, validation, and every single person I've interviewed has become like a mentor to me. I have learned something from every single individual who has taken the time to be on my little show, and I'm just so grateful for that. And feedback from others and how it's impacting them, I was like, wow, that's even bigger than I ever imagined. It's helping others. The ripple effect is real.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I love that. And this is such a great example of you just listening to what's coming through you. There's a meaning and you didn't know where it was going to go, or if anybody would listen, or how big it would get. But the fact that there was something in your heart that you followed, that's also the meaning and the giving back. And then it can take on a life of its own.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's so true. I just really let go of the outcome and was like, I'm just curious. I'm going to talk to people, and just kind of, I had zero expectations for anything. I thought maybe if one person listens, that's cool. I really didn't put it out there to be like this markety, salesy. I don't know. I never have any intention of that. And I'm not good at that stuff anyway. So I'm just like, this is just became so personal to me, and it became a vehicle to help me navigate my own career change, while now helping others. So it's a bus. We're all on the career flipper bus. Let's go.
This is part of how you navigated your liminal. And in the meantime, it became a gift and a giveaway for other people to also have support in their transition. So cool.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for being a part of it. And speaking of reaching out to people, and, you offer such a wealth of advice and support to help people navigate a career change, any change, or just life in general. Katie, how can people connect with you? How can they find you? Tell us where we can find all the things.
Okay, great. So, Somatic Nature Therapy Institute is my business, and somaticnaturetherapy.com. We are also on Instagram, Somatic Nature Therapy, and Facebook. And there are so many ways that we support people who are making life changes. One is therapy, of course. We're in Boulder, so we have to work with people in Colorado, but we also do intensives for people who want to kind of fly out and do several days back to back, and also with life coaching. And then I do a lot of training of therapists that may or may not resonate with your audience, but some of the big things that we do, one is we lead wilderness quests, and those are this upcoming year, 4 days, which is going into the woods with a group for women, and it includes a 24-hour solo on the land overnight, and it's a ceremonial process, and we help people to consider what is their intention and question, and how are they going to work with it when they're out on the land. So that's a big one. And then I also have a program called Courting Your Medicine, which is helping people find their inherent gifts that they want to be living in the world. And we have one that's a 3-month kind of arc, and one that's a 6-day. And we didn't talk about this, but one of the core aspects of it is that, it's hard to see ourselves. It's hard to know our own gifts because it's so us that we don't realize that it's anything special, but we can see everybody else's. So it's really helpful to have community to reflect that. And the idea that when we trust and know what is my gift in the world, that we can be living that in our work, but we can also not be living, we are living that everywhere we go. And so as an opportunity to help people really know and value themselves and their gifts and how they're already giving them. And then for some people, and how do I want to be giving them in the world? So very in alignment with this topic here.
Oh, yeah, very in alignment. You've created such a unique set of opportunities and resources to help so many people, Katie. That's incredible. And even the training, you never know who's going to be listening and thinking about becoming a therapist or psychologist. You never know. And so I just think everything is so incredibly helpful. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I am so honored to have you here today. Thank you so much, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. So honored to be here as well, and so good to meet you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Career Flipper podcast. Be sure to connect with Katie using the links in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's career flip story, share it with a friend who could use a little motivation with their own career change. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes. And got new ones coming at you every single Thursday. If you have a career flip story of your own, I would love to hear it. Visit thecareerflipper.com to learn more about how to submit your story for a future episode. And if you're looking for someone to speak at your next event about career changes and making that leap, think of me. I love sharing these stories and sharing what I've learned and giving others the courage to take their own first steps. Just drop me an email over to hello@thecareerflipper.com. And remember, my friend, every step counts. Keep going. Who knows where that next move might take you? What's the best that could happen?